Welcome back everyone. As most of you know by now, the M1 lineup from Apple, stemming from their M1 Mac Mini all the way up to their M1 Mac Pros and Mac Studios, these are some of the best MacBooks Apple has ever made. And personally, I think the M1 MacBook Air is probably one of the best MacBooks you can buy for the mixture of price tag and the power and the performance that you're getting within it. Now, I do want to state one thing, right? The illusion of better devices can always sway your opinion on the lower end devices. So just last year, the M1 MacBook Air was like one of the most powerful MacBooks that a lot of people were recommending, including myself. But since then, we've gotten a lot new, better MacBooks. So because of that, you may be looking at the M1 MacBook Pros, the 14-inch and 16-inch models, and you're like, oh, that one has way more RAM and way more power, whatever. But I'm going to tell you, for a majority of people out there, you will not need as much power that you probably think you need. Personally, I edit a lot of videos, I do a lot of photoshopping things, and I do a lot of audio and video recording. And honestly, my M1 MacBook Pro, my 13-inch model I bought about a year and a half ago, is still doing the job for me, and it's still a powerhouse in my opinion. So what I would recommend you to do is to just kind of get a glimpse of how much power and how much resources you're going to be using from your MacBook, because the power and resources are one area of this Mac, but there's a whole other area of this Mac in which, something kind of, get a little bit weird, but it's not a crazy big deal. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense to you. On the outside of the MacBook Air, I think this is, in terms of coloring, the best styling of MacBook you can buy right now. There's really no other MacBook Pros that give us the ability of, customizing the colors like these things do. With the base M1 MacBook Air, you can actually get the space gray model, you can get the silver model, and you can get that extremely beautiful gold color. That, in my opinion, is my favorite color that I have now, and without a doubt, this is my go-to color. Whenever I go and buy something like, a MacBook or whatever, if it comes in that gold color, or if an iPhone comes in that gold color, I'm almost always swayed to it, and I love that color more than anything. So that's a really, really big thing to keep in mind. Flipping the thing open though, you do have that same 13-inch display. It's a Retina display. It's pretty much been on these MacBooks for a few years now, and personally, I think it's a really good looking panel. Of course it doesn't have ProMotion like the latest, MacBooks do, but I still think it's pretty good, and I don't really have too much to complain about it in that specific standpoint. Now at the bottom, you do have this full-size keyboard, and it is a Magic Keyboard technically, and it has a lot of travel to it. It feels really good, and I've been talking about some of these older MacBooks too, and it's kind of a shame of what Apple kind of did to the last generation of MacBooks. I feel like they could have done, a lot better of a job, but at least with these specific MacBooks, they fixed the keyboards, they fixed the trackpads, and for the most part, these things aren't failing like they used to, and I think that's a really, really big thing to keep in mind. So with this specific MacBook, the keyboard and the trackpad, I'm perfectly fine with it, and I do think it's overall a pretty good setup on this specific device. Now we do have two USB Type-C ports on the left side of this device, and that's it. You have the headphone jack too, but there aren't any other options of adding more ports, and this is the thing that kind of weirded me out about the M1 MacBook Pro as well. We only had two USB Type-C ports that we could max out on. The newest ones we do have more ports, but that's kind of a sad thing where we didn't have the ability of adding more ports to our MacBook, which I found really sad. So I think personally this is one area of these devices that could probably get improved in the next couple generations, but even for me, my two USB Type-C ports hasn't really been a big deal. Just sometimes I would like to have another port on the side, but it's really not a big deal to a lot of people. Now, the base model of this MacBook without any deals or student discounts or anything is $1,000, and you're getting, the M1 chipset, 8-core CPU, 7-core GPU. You're getting 256 gigabytes of storage. Now, you can get a higher end model that also has the M1 chip, but it has 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU. So it does have that extra core of GPU, but it also comes in with twice the amount of base storage as a base MacBook. So it has 512 gigabytes of storage there, and that one is $1,249. So a little bit more expensive for that model, but they've been out for a little bit of time now, so you can easily find them in the used market for less than $1,000 all over the place. And as these things get older and older, they're really only going to be getting cheaper and cheaper. So definitely keep that in mind. I think that's a big thing to keep in mind as well. Now, in terms of the actual usability of this MacBook, I will say, if you're somebody who even needs, I would typically recommend MacBook Airs to students, people who just really need to type papers and study notes and kind of do things that may not require too many resources. If you're trying to go into the programming field, or if you're using, a lot of video editing applications, it may seem like the M1 MacBook Air won't be able to handle the things that you throw at it, but I'm going to be completely honest. For a majority of of the tasks that I've done with my M1 MacBook Air, Pro, which is basically the M1 MacBook Air, and that I use the M1 MacBook Air and I basically have the same performance, it's a very powerful machine. No matter what you're going to do with this type of MacBook, it's really going to be able to handle the things that you throw at it. And this is what I stated before. When you have an M1 MacBook Air, especially for the use cases that Apple is kind of delivering, they do a great job at giving you a very quiet machine. This thing doesn't really have fans inside of it as far as I can tell, so it's a very quiet machine. It doesn't really require too many resources, but on top of that, if you need that extra performance, if you need that extra power, this MacBook will be able to deliver that specific task for you. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say all you do is just write papers and you just want to go ahead and just, read notes and edit PDFs and, deliver your things on it. If most of the things you're doing is on the web browser using Word documents or Excels or something like that, this MacBook is going to be able to handle it without a doubt. Even though we're like a year and almost 2 years into the cycle, this MacBook is going to be perfectly fine in that specific situation. But even if you're somebody who wants to take it up a notch, maybe you're somebody who wants to maybe like go up into maybe a little bit more into video editing, or maybe you want to start going into other things like photo editing, photoshopping, or you want to play some games on your MacBook, you want to download some emulators and go down that route, this MacBook with the chipset inside is still more than enough powerful for you to go ahead and utilize this specific MacBook. And the best thing about this MacBook being a little bit older now is that a lot of the applications that I kind of like using, like the Dolphin emulator and some other, applications here too, like Final Cut Pro and Photoshop and all these other applications, they have been updated to use that M1 chipset. So when this MacBook first came out, there may have been a lot of applications that didn't work properly or that were failing or whatever the case is. But right now, almost 2 years later, these MacBooks with the M1 chipset have been so optimized with all the software within them that a lot of these developers that are developing all these other softwares for this MacBook, they are utilizing this M1 chipset, and that is so awesome. So even though when this MacBook first came out, a lot of people were happy about it and all this other stuff, as of right now, this MacBook is becoming so much better over time because the software that you would use is becoming more and more optimized. So I will definitely tell you, when it comes down to it, this is a very solid MacBook as a whole. If you're trying to go through and you're on a budget and you want to get a MacBook that's going to last you for the next several years, and you just kind of want to, get a MacBook that has enough power for you, this is a great starting point. Even if you're somebody whose tasks are extremely powerful and they're demanding, this is a MacBook that's still going to be able to handle really everything you throw at it. And this is where I get a little bit, too excited about these specific devices, because I just see a huge future with this MacBook Air. The Intel MacBooks I didn't really like too much, to be honest. My 2015 MacBook Pro I used a lot. My Intel iMac I used a lot too, but I never really kept a lot of my MacBook Airs. I never really saw myself using them. I always felt like the power with them, it just seemed like a watered down machine. And when Apple made the Retina MacBook Air, I was a little bit happier, but I still wasn't, super happy about some of the decisions they made. But right now with the M1 MacBook Air, even though we're almost a few years into the life cycle of this thing, it's gotten so much better throughout time. And I would definitely tell you, it's never been more apparent for me to recommend a MacBook to some people rather than the MacBook Air. If you have the money, I would recommend going maybe to an M1 iMac, if you don't really need to have like a portable device. But regardless, the M1 MacBook Air is completely worth it, and I would highly recommend picking it up in 2022. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.